Hello, everybody. We're set up now. This is TABC Talks, our monthly series where we focus on different issues. One of the things we already had come up was somebody wanting to talk about recording this meeting, and I was going to cover it later on. These all go up on YouTube eventually. Normally we give it about 2 weeks, so you don't need to worry about recording it. It will be up for public consumption pretty shortly. My name is Mike Kennedy. I'm with the I've been with the agency for over a decade, and I'm out of the McAllen area office. I'm the team lead for audit in the San Antonio region. This presentation is general guidance that we're going to give you over auditing. If you have specific circumstances, specific questions that directly relate to your business, you can always ask them in the chat feature, or if it's later on, I would contact your local TABC office to get more specific guidance on any issues that come up. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can ask me through the chat feature. I might answer them during the presentation, or if not, then I'll get to them at the end and we'll answer everybody's questions that they have. And so the topic for today will be audit readiness for manufacturers and distributors. And so we can get started. Presentation overview. So we're going to be doing a few different things. The first thing we're going to cover is terminology. Then we'll be going into the types of TABC audits. And then finally, we'll be going into the general rules for all audits. Telling you what to expect for each audit, then going over the common mistakes and violations that might occur. And then last, we'll be going over tips for an easy audit experience. And then we'll summarize and kind of conclude the presentation and answer any questions anybody has. So first thing, terminology used in this presentation. There is some specific terminology that's in the code and rules. When we talk about manufacturers and distributors, those are two specific types of licenses, normally referring to beer. In this case, we are just using those words to mean any business that manufactures or distributes alcohol in general. The same thing goes for license and permits. Those have very specific meaning in the code and rules as far as licenses being pertaining to beer, permits pertaining to any other form of alcohol. And here, though, it's that they're interchangeable and they can mean the same thing, just somebody holds a permit or license with us. So the types of TABC audits we're going to cover are going to be 4 different types. The first one is going to be the 90-day records analysis. This will normally be one of the first audits you have occur on your licensed premise. The next will be an excise tax audit. Then the last 2 are done normally under special circumstances or rarely, which are marketing practice audits and witness destruction audits. So for all of our audits, the first thing that they normally start with is a letter. We send out a letter requesting that your business provide certain documents or set up an appointment or time for TABC to visit your business. Then we'll normally follow up after that with a phone call or a visit to your licensed premise just to make sure that everything was understood in the letter and that we were very clear about it. And we do this because all audits require us to review documentation, and that documentation does need to be provided on a timely basis. Otherwise, the scope of the audit might change, the issues with that audit might change, and so we just want to make sure that everything is brought to us at the right time. Typically, our largest audits take between 40 to 45 hours to complete, and a lot of that will be at your licensed premise. When we're also talking about these, do consider that we do have our regulatory warning system in place now. If we do discover a violation at your business, we might issue a warning rather than an administrative sanction. This is based on a few different factors. It could be based on if it's your only violation. It has to be a minor regulatory issue. It can't affect public safety, and it can't have been intentional. If all of that is in place, then it could be that you get a warning instead of an administrative case, which might carry a suspension or a civil penalty. If we identify repeat violations of a similar nature, your business could be subject to stricter penalties due to the multiple violations. the 90-day records analysis, this is the first audit your business is going to have happen. It happens to all businesses that are subject to excise tax, that have to file excise tax reports with TABC. And the purpose is just to verify that your business is properly filing its excise tax reports and maintaining all the required support documentation. When we discuss support documentation, there's support documentation, or we might call it source documents later on. Either of these things refer to the base level of evidence that we need for any kind of tax implication. So whether it's an invoice, purchase order, that kind of information. We'll go over specific examples later on. But we just make sure with this first 90-day records analysis, we literally do 90 days worth of records, we review those, and we try to do it in the first 90 to 120 days of your business operations. We will come in, we will look at the excise tax reports that you have filed, and we'll make sure that they're currently up to date, and then we'll also make sure that you're keeping all the required information. We'll normally try to call or visit your location to arrange the analysis. So when we do that, be prepared that we will come in and we will want to review your copies of the excise tax report, so do make sure that you have them available. Those forms are available on our public website. We'll also want to look at support documentations, as I was saying, or source documents, as I was saying, which could be purchase and sales invoices, production and bottling reports, or it could be invoices to ship captains, invoices to military bases. There's a lot of different requirements depending on what you're asking for an exemption or that you received as an alcoholic beverage. We also want to act as a resource to answer your question, what's required. Please take advantage of the opportunity. The thing is that we do need whoever your report preparer is available for the review. We normally could just do a review of the records and call the person. We don't necessarily need them to be in place at the location the entire time, but we do normally would want to ask them questions about how they're processing things, how they arrived at certain figures on the reports, and so this could come up. This review can last anywhere from it could be a half an hour to maybe a couple of hours at worst, depending just on the level of engagement you have when talking to us. If you have lots of questions, that of course will make it take longer, or depending on if the records are in order or not. If they're out of order, then of course we might spend more time trying to figure out how we're going to correct those first few records so that going forward, everything else is correct. Some of the common mistakes and violations that we see when we're doing these records analysis: number one, it could be that you're selling to or purchasing from the wrong permits. So for example, a distiller selling to retailers when they're only allowed to sell to wholesalers or consumers. Instead of selling to those people, they're selling to a retailer. So we catch that early on, and we might figure out how we can address that, whether it be a warning, whether it be an administrative violation, what tax implication that has. The same thing would go that a wholesaler or distributor is purchasing from an unlicensed entity. Then we might want to find out who that unlicensed entity is and see about getting them a permit so that you can purchase from them. It could also be that you're not filing your monthly excise tax reports, and this is just a reminder that you have to file a report even if there's nothing to report. I've seen lots of them where people forget to do this, but you can just put zeros on everything, sign it, and send it off. This way it tells us that you're still keeping up with the permit, and that it could be that you're having a slow time, but at least we know that you're still operating. Not keeping proper source documents. I come in and you say that you sold to wholesalers or that you sold to a specific individual, but when I start looking, maybe you don't have the source documents to back that up, and therefore we can't really claim that exemption. So we'll start telling you what you do need to keep, so that way you can make sure that you are keeping up with those documents. Violations here typically result in a warning because, like I said at the beginning, we do have that regulatory warning system, and normally most mistakes we encounter here are just that, mistakes, accidents, and so we just clear them up and we move on from here, and so that way you can continue and you start your business in compliance with us. The next major audit we do for upper tier manufacturers and distributors is an excise tax audit. Any business who files excise tax reports with us is a person who will receive one of these audits. Excise tax in Texas is paid on the first sale of alcohol. And let me correct that, state excise tax in Texas is paid on the first sale of alcohol. This normally occurs when the alcohol goes to the retailer or to the consumer. So if it doesn't go to one of them, then more than likely you don't have a tax implication at that point, or you're not going to be owing taxes on that. So the purpose here, the excise tax audit, the number one purpose is of course to verify that you're paying the correct amount of tax. And we will also review compliance with various laws and rules depending on what kind of business you have. And normally this will examine the most recent 12 months. It can go back further, but normally it is the most recent 12 months of reports that we have received. We normally do conduct these audits annually, depending on the scale you operate at, depending on how many we have. We try to do it once a year. So while we're at your business, the TABC auditor will verify the amounts reported on your excise tax forms. We'll also ensure compliance with production limits if you're a manufacturer. And we will verify that that information will ensure compliance with the production limits to make sure that you are keeping up with those. And we will also make sure that you're keeping up with the product label requirements as far as getting new labels. We will ensure compliance with direct sales to consumers. So for instance, with a distiller wanting to keep up with the sales to consumers would require that they are keeping track of driver's license numbers or some way to make sure they're reinforcing that they can only sell 2 bottles a month. Ensure products are purchased from proper sources. This goes for both manufacturers and distributors. So not only are we just verifying the amounts on the report, we will be verifying other documentation. So for documents your business must provide the auditor with any source documents that were used to compile your excise tax reports. This goes back to invoices, production records, bottling reports. We'll want to see all of these, inventory reports, and of course any support documents for exemptions claimed, whether that be destructions, exports, military ship sales, any of those. The personnel, so for an excise tax audit, we are going to want to talk to a lot of people. We're normally going to want to talk to whoever your excise tax report preparer is. We're going to want to talk to your inventory people or warehouse people to see what the procedures are there. Your receivers for anything that comes in from the suppliers, and then anybody involved in production and bottling. All of these can have a hand in coming up with numbers and figures that go onto the final report, and so we will want to talk to all of them and figure out exactly how those are being put together. The TABC auditor will be at your business for 1 day, or it could be up to a whole week. I've been out of business they're out auditing at before. And so do make sure that you are prepared to provide us with a place to work at your location. When we're looking at these records, it could be literally pallets of information. Sometimes we've received from some people, and so we will be working there on site. We won't be bringing that with us. Make sure that you talk to the auditor about how much time, the scope of it, the complexity involved. We're always here to try to minimize our impact on the business, and we want to make sure that it's a smooth process for you as well. And so let us know if you think there's going to be issues beforehand. Some common mistakes and violations we see. The first major one is the failure to conduct physical inventory regularly. A number of people will just go off a perpetual inventory system and they'll never take a physical inventory. And so this results in a number of problems if anything goes missing. And so I would suggest that you always take inventory at the beginning or end of each month before you file that report off. And so that way you can make sure that you are staying up to date with your inventory records. Lack of source documents. If you are going to claim an exemption, you must provide your TABC auditor with source documents such as invoices, bills of lading, purchase orders, or approved destruction applications. If we don't have an exemption of some kind, then it would be a violation. Lack of daily bottling records. Records must be kept that show that when your manufactured product was bottled. We will need to be viewing those all the time, and those do need to be upkept daily. I see a lot of people trying to do monthly statements of bottling or production, and that cannot take place. We have to see the daily bottling records, and that is a requirement under the code rules. Information missing from an invoice. So these could be invoices that you're sending out to other wholesalers, retailers, but we see a lot where there's information missing. So all invoices need to have your information, your permit number, address, dates, all that kind of information when it left your business. And then it also needs it for whoever's receiving it or the other party involved in it. They need to have their permit number, their address, their permit number, and everything else. Selling and producing over applicable limits for your permit type. So every permit, or a large number of the permits nowadays have various compliance limits put on them. Examples here are distilleries selling more than 2 750 milliliter bottles to a single consumer in a month, brew pub producing more than 10,000 barrels of ale and or beer, or a winery selling more than 35,000 gallons for off-premise consumption. So all of those would be violations that would be addressed once again through that regulatory warning system, either issuing a warning, or if it seems to have been intentionally done, or there's multiple violations in the past, it could be an administrative case. Marketing practice audits are done not necessarily on an annual basis or on a basis that we regularly do. Instead, businesses in the manufacturing and distribution tiers have these done to verify that your business is following all the applicable laws and regulations. There's a number of these that ensure an arm's length relationship between the tiers and ensure that you're following cash and credit law requirements. And so when we do these, it could be every few years, or it can be when we receive a complaint alleging that a marketing violation has been occurred by your business. So if we receive a complaint, we will review that complaint and then determine if a full audit is necessary or if there's a more specific investigation that needs to be done. So if a marketing practice audit's done, these can once again vary widely depending on the permit type being audited, the basis for the audit. And so it could be, if you're a manufacturer, we could be looking at label approval, trademarks, territorial agreements, money and items that go to different tiers. For distributors, it can be advertising specialties, novelty items, monetary and promotional items provided to retailers. All of these can be factors in what we look at. Documents, because these vary so widely, the documents will vary widely as well. And so just be ready to provide anything regarding sales, promotions, discounts, contracts, territorial agreements, etc. Same thing goes for the personnel that we're going to need. It could really depend on what the basis of the audit is and what kind of business you do have. We will be at your business for a while to conduct these. And so one of the best pieces of advice I can give here, and with any audit that we do at your business, is to talk with the TABC auditor when they call or when they send out that letter to make sure that you understand kind of what the requirements and what they will be looking at is. This goes double for a marketing practice audit just because of how wide of a scope some of these can have and some of the records that could be involved. Some common violations, same thing as kind of the beginning, failing to keep some of that support documentation and production records can begin intruding into marketing practice audits. Failure to document cash credit law violations can be another major one. If you're new to the business, cash credit law is how the applicable transactions are done. So for beer, it has to be that it's paid on or before delivery in cash, and for credit law, it's that they pay by the required time limits. So if it's the 1st or 15th of the month that product is delivered, they have to pay by the 25th. If it's the 16th to the end of the month, they have to pay by the 10th of the following month. And so we will go and we'll review how you've been keeping up with these transactions in the cash credit law system that the agency has, and we'll be looking at your bank accounts and records to make sure that if you did receive an NSF check that you did report it properly, or if somebody paid after the proposed time limit or the required time limits. Unlawful agreements with other tiers. These can include arrangements for discounts, equipment, items, and or money. This is a large category and can include many things, and so it could involve different aspects. To best prepare for your marketing practice audit, like I said, talk to your TABC auditor and ask questions after you receive the initial letter from TABC initiating the audit and requesting documents. It could be that we might not realize that you have a certain document that could make it easier on us. And so I'd really ask the TABC auditor what areas they're looking at and kind of make sure that you and your auditor are on the same page. Witness destruction audits are interesting because we don't start these audits. These are solely initiated by the industry. And so what happens is that if you have alcohol that's gone bad or has been damaged, and you want to claim an exemption on your taxes for that alcohol, you will need to file a Form C-716, which is an application for destruction of beverages, and that will need to be sent to us at least 3 business days prior to the proposed destruction date. Whenever we see one of these, it's not just that you want to destroy the beverages, which some people think, it's that you also want that exemption on your taxes. If you just have beverages and you want to destroy them and not get an exemption on your taxes, you're going to pay the tax for it, then you don't need to fill these out, and you can just destroy the beverages however you normally do it. So what we do when we do one of these audits is that we're trying to ensure that you're accurately reporting and that you're eligible for the tax exemption. So these all start after you submit that Form C-716. That triggers the initial audit, which we review the application. So attached to your application, you'll send in normally an electronic spreadsheet or a printed one, and it'll have all the beverages that are to be destroyed and the amounts. And so we'll review those, make sure your figures are adding up correctly, make sure the classification of beverage is correct, you know, that this is a beer, not an ale, or a liquor, or a wine. And so we'll make sure that that information is sufficient and that it's clear. And so then we will normally sign off at that point, and we will send that approved form back to you. And at that point, you can go ahead and begin preparing the beverages and destroy them. If the amounts on the form are found to be lacking, there's problems, or sometimes maybe even just randomly, we will want to go out and we will want to physically inspect the beverages and observe the destruction before granting approval. And so in this case, we'll give you a call and we'll ask, you know, make sure you're still planning on destroying on that day, make sure everything is set, and we'll schedule a time to come out and physically inspect and take inventory of all the beverages. So when we do go out there and when you send it in, you normally should be ready to provide us with a copy of the Form C-716 and all the attached inventory documents. And these audits can vary depending on how much merchandise is involved and how it is packed or stored. And so for that reason, I would make sure that you are not palletizing your merchandise before the destruction has been approved, because what could happen is that if you are palletizing it and wrapping it up, then we might ask you to unwrap everything, and that just takes more time. So don't palletize it or put it together until we give the official approval. If there's any kind of inaccuracies or incomplete portions of the form, those will result in more time. None of this normally results in any administrative action as far as a warning or a case. This just all has tax implications, or we might not approve the destruction. So, and we'll work with you on these. If we find a problem, it doesn't mean we're going to disprove it. We'll just normally send it back to you and say, hey, make sure you're filling out this, or have somebody sign it. It's not a major issue by any means normally. Failure to retain certain documents after the beverages are destroyed can result in you losing the tax exemption. So make sure that you keep the TABC signed copy of the affidavit stating that a representative of the permit holder witnessed it. And then we'll also need something from you as far as a signed copy of an affidavit stating that your people destroyed it, or that a representative of the landfill or whoever took it and destroyed it. And so we'll need one of those two things attached to that for you to claim the tax exemption. And that'll be something that we look at when we go and do your excise audit. So when it comes down to it, the tips for an easy audit experience. So first is knowing all audits your business must undergo and when, and that's all been covered here. So the 90-day analysis will be done at the beginning. Excise audits are normally done annually. Marketing practice audits are done with normally, like I said, on a complaint basis or every few years. And then witness destruction audits are done when you initiate them. Know what reports and records your business is required to produce. Make sure that anything that you have on a tax report, on a witness destruction report or application, make sure that you do have the source documents to back up the figures that you're putting on those reports. Without those source documents and support documentation, you can't be claiming those exemptions or those areas of your report. If violations are realized, ensure you know what the violations were and why it happened so that you can prevent it in the future and comply in the future with us, and that way we can solve those problems. Any kind of questions or audits Any kind of questions or issues you have for your business, when it's up for audit, ask them at that time. We are a resource. Utilize us. Call your TABC office if you have a question, and get with us. I mean, that's the easiest way to solve a number of problems, is to just start asking ahead of time and make sure that you know, if an issue comes up, that you do have that answer that you need. So just to summarize everything here, we do conduct audits to carry out our duty to ensure your business is complying with applicable laws and regulations. Most audits are initiated with advance notice to your business, but some audits can be random, and you should be ready. A number of these have code rules requirements for documentation, and so we will be going over those. You will be needing to make sure that you do have, if you are required to have something ready under the code or rules, that it is ready when we stop by. When your business receives notice that it's going to be audited, be sure you know the scope of the audit and the required documents that are going to be involved. And an audit is an opportunity to work directly with TABC to get your business on the path toward compliance. Use it as a chance to have a personalized Q&A session about your business. And so at this time, I'm going to start answering some questions that have come up throughout the presentation. I currently have 2. If you do have any questions, you can ask us through the chat feature of the video conference. Or if later on you can send an email to the stakeholder at tabc.texas.gov. So the 2 questions that have come up since I started, the first one is state excise tax owned on product that is given away as a social courtesy or a charitable donation. And the answer to that would be yes, it is. Anytime it is the first sell, which means that it went to the consumer. And so at this time, we don't offer an exemption on charitable or social courtesies. And there's nowhere to claim that on income tax, or not the income tax, the excise tax forms. Just for clarification, we can destroy product without notifying TABC. We only need to notify TABC if we want an exemption on our taxes, right? And that is correct. If you want to destroy the product and you don't want to go through the hassle of notifying us, you can just kind of eat that exemption that you would normally have gotten and not worry about claiming that on your excise tax forms. The only time you need to notify us is if you want that exemption. I have 2 businesses in my area, and one is always claiming every destruction, no matter how small, and the other one, they probably could make $1,000 off of it if they wanted to, and they just don't. And so both of those businesses have different ways of doing things, and it's just up to you all how you would like to do those destructions. The last question we received was, you mentioned driver's license numbers in relation to its stills permits record keeping for bottle sales, and that it's not clarified in the code. Is it a requirement? And the code actually does clarify and state that it is a requirement that a permit holder must check a purchaser's identification and keep records of purchases in a manner that enables the permit holder to comply with this section. So we would require that you have some kind of record keeping in order to be able to comply with that requirement. Any last minute questions? If not, then we will go ahead and stop the presentation now. Thank you for joining us for another TABC Talks. And that should be it for today. Y'all have a good day.